Inspiration is an excellent tool to use in the area of social studies in that it helps particularly visual learning. Visual learners gain a great deal from it, but it also is very effective in terms of helping to set up advanced organizers in clarifying thinking and helping students organize information. As an example, if we take a look right here, we're looking at the visual learning techniques which can help students, and one of them is the area of clarity of thinking. Students are able to, through a webbing process, to make connections and to be able to show their level of understanding in terms of how certain concepts, certain ideas, and certain events are linked and connected to one another. By looking at that, created by a student, a teacher can gain some idea as to the level of understanding of students. Secondly, it's a reinforcing of understanding. Students are able to make, in their own words, and take ownership for the understanding which they have achieved. It helps them to internalize and actually see visually the connections of the thoughts which they have formulated in their own mind. Third use as a tool in this area is the integration of new knowledge. Prior knowledge, if it is put up in a visual fashion, allows the student to see what they already know, what they already understand, and what their connections are. When new knowledge is added to this, they can see how the connections take place with the prior knowledge which has already existed. Again, this can be done through a webbing process. This can be done through work with things like timelines. Then you also have a way in which you can help in terms of dealing with identity or misconceptions in terms of connections between concepts and ideas. What takes place here is you could give a student a timeline, or you could give a student a webbing process and leave some of the areas blank that students would have to fill in the information. By them filling in the proper information, it shows that they have an understanding of the connections between different elements, different concepts. Basically then, what we're looking at in terms of using inspiration as an effective tool in the teaching of social studies is through the idea of webbing, also through the idea of idea mapping or concept mapping, which is basically almost the same as the idea mapping which takes place. All three of those tools are extremely excellent to use in terms of helping the student visualize and take ownership for their learning. To provide a specific example as to what we're talking about in terms of using inspiration, here's an example of using it for webbing. What's taking place here is, let's say that what we're interested in is making sure that students have an understanding of the causes of the French Revolution. We centralize that in the beginning of the formation of the webbing. And then what we do is we take specific areas that we map out and place down. And in terms of items and also concepts that take place, for example, financial difficulties, the fact that it was an absolute monarchy, the fact that the Age of Enlightenment was taking place, we then connect to that particular concepts or ideas in which the student makes a connection to those larger areas or concepts and what impact those things would have. For example, if you look at the Age of Enlightenment, it talks about a liberal society. It talks about the challenge to the absolute right of kings, and begins to look at the rise of the middle class. By the student doing this, what they're doing is they're showing that they can make connections. As we take a look at the information which is taking place here, you can see how large the webbing and how complex the webbing can become making the connections in all these different areas. It's an excellent way for a student to be able to organize the information and see the connections between concepts and ideas. A further use of this information is something that students organize information which you're picking up from either primary or secondary sources, let's say to do a report or to summarize information. If they're looking at a particular character, a character in history, they can list the connections between that and maybe some of the other characters, and they can list with it examples. In a way, it's almost a formation of an outline, a visual outline that the student can use and take a look at before they would even begin any written work to present the information. And here's an excellent example of using inspiration to serve as a means by which you can check the level of a student's understanding, in which I provide a setup of information, but I leave blanks. And what I do in this case is I expect the student to be able to fill in the blanks in terms of the information called for right here. They could be looking at who the Allies were in World War I, who the Allies were in World War II, who the Central Powers were, and they're able to display their level of understanding of important facts and the connections they have with particular groups. Again, it's a help in terms of organizing information. And one of the major themes within social studies calls for a student to show an understanding of change and continuality in terms of change. The construction of timelines, which can be done very effectively through the combination of both pictures and text, for a student to show their understanding of the connection between different events which take place in history is extremely important for students to show their level of knowledge. They can be given almost any assignment dealing with timelines, and instead of having text within this particular area, they could also, at the same time, they could have pictures in terms of each one of these. Let's say, for example, it had to do with particular individuals, or it could show the background or pictures from one of these battles which has taken place. Again, a means by which it helps for the students to organize information. And how the timelines can be utilized is that the same thing could take place is, let's say you wanted to personalize something in terms of a timeline. Let's say that you wanted to add the relevance of the student knowing where they were at a particular point in time and what was taking place in their life during a particular point of time. They could fill in some of the blocks across the top part of here. Also, along with that, what they could do is they could include some of the major events which would take place during that particular period of time. That would allow them to see the connections between their own life and what takes place. An excellent way in which to provide for internalization, relevance, and giving the student an opportunity to achieve ownership. Overall, the whole idea of using inspiration and having the students exercise this tool is extremely helpful in terms of social studies, because it allows things to be visually presented to the students, making it easier for them to understand the connections between concepts and ideas.